Very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I have heard one or two people say that they don't think the government has a plan, and I actually don't agree with that. I think the government actually has a very good plan that it set out in May, which I read at the time and thought it was very sound. My problem is that the government often doesn't seem to remember it has a plan and doesn't always follow through on some of the things in it. For example, my honourable friend, the member for Wickham, reminded us about the risks of a vaccine. Now, the Prime Minister said in the foreword to the plan, it's clear the only feasible long-term solution lies with a vaccine or drug-based treatment. But he was frank enough to say, well, we hope for a breakthrough. Hope is not a plan. And in that document, which was published in May, he said a mass vaccine or treatment may be more than a year away. And I think the best evidence even now is that that year, which would take us to next May or so, is about the best case scenario for being able to vaccinate older members of the community if all goes well. So it's clear that we have to do other things. Now, the first phase of the government's plan was the lockdown, to drive down the virus to a very low level. The second phase was to introduce smarter controls, for example, COVID-safe workplaces and hospitality venues, combined with an effective testing and tracing system. And I said in my intervention to the Secretary of State, looking at the evidence at the moment, the second most important piece of that, according to the government's plan, was local authority public health services to bring a valuable local dimension to testing, contact tracing and support to people who need to self-isolate. I welcome the extra support given to those local public health teams in the high-risk areas that the government has set out, but I would argue that should go further and extend across the country. And the importance of that is that if you look at the data, we're only reaching about 74% of those who test positive to get their contact information, and of those contacts in total, we're only reaching 68.6 of them in the latest data. That's the lowest percentage of contacts, which means overall we're only reaching about half of the contacts of people who test positive. And my own view, yes, I will.
The right honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he agree with me that the data also shows that those who are traced by local authority or regional public health teams, actually the tracing rates are somewhere between 90 and 100%, and actually the central contact tracing is only somewhere in the 60s. So that's more evidence that we should be running it locally.
Look, I do think there is some evidence that local teams are better. So my own view is I work, as I'm sure every member of this House does, closely with the fantastic Director of Public Health that we have in Gloucestershire, Sarah Scott, who's recently been promoted to a wider brief, including that, and her team. I would have real confidence that if she were given the resources, she and her team would do a fantastic job of tracing contacts quickly and getting to them and working with them to explain why isolating was important, and perhaps being able to work with them to identify some of the barriers that my right honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, mentioned, that might stop them isolating. If we were to do that and be much more effective, that's what will enable us to live with this virus, but live meaningful lives where people can have more social contact and more ability to have those important contacts which the Secretary of State acknowledged were important. And I think that was in the government's original plan, and I think it should lean into it. So I think the government's got a strategy. It needs to go back to that original strategy and look at the areas which are not being executed as well as they could be. I said in my intervention, I give credit to the test and trace team for massively expanding testing compared to where it was, but the testing is not an end, it's a means to an end, to identify the virus, to isolate areas where we need to put in further measures, and to encourage people to isolate. If we do that, we'll be successful, and the country will thank us for it.